Well, release actually turns out to be a very, very difficult thing to try to deal with and learn. In fact, it was even difficult for me to learn to define and think properly about. It took me over a year to come to grips with this problem initially, and longer than that before I started to differentiate things like release and surrender. Imagine I say to you, okay, visualize in full detail with emotion the new car that you want, and then totally put that out of your mind. And you might be thinking to yourself, how in the world can I put that out of my mind? I mean, this is something I'm really passionate about. I'm thinking about it all the time. I really want it. There you have one of the major problems associated with release. So we're going to talk about release from a number of different angles, and it's going to be a lot like visualization plus emotion. There's different ways to think about it. There's different ways to learn it. There's different ways to go about it. And it really factors in to the mix and match framework that we talked about with visualization and emotion. Let's start with the fact that there's basically two things that are associated with release. The first is that it can help you with visualization and emotion. It sort of cleans out your filters and can make your visualization and emotion part of this process much more effective. We're just going to touch on that lightly, and then we're going to go into literally releasing. So literally producing releases in the sense that if I tell you, don't think about the car, after you've done your V plus E portion, how do you do that? So first, let's look at its role in enhancing visualization and emotion. We talked about those filters and briefly discussed the idea that learning how to release cleans out your filters. Well, there's all sorts of different ways that we can think about this. When we're talking about releasing to clean out your filters, what we're really talking about is sort of standard cognitive and emotional, meaning thought and emotion, release. Your thoughts have emotional charges that are associated with them. And by using techniques that separate those thoughts from the emotions, you can really enhance the effectiveness of your visualization plus emotion portion of power of thought. So it makes that part of the formula much more effective. It's effective because they don't have to be as precise. So when you're visualizing that car and you're bringing in the smells and you're bringing in how the tactile sensations are, how something feels, maybe how the upholstery feels or how the steering wheel feels in your hand or whatever it is, because you've cleaned out some of those associations between your thoughts and your feelings in that area, simply put, your visualization and emotion part, you're expressing intent. You're saying, as a function of expressing that intent, this is the goal. This is what I want from doing this process. It doesn't have to be as precise. Now, most of releasing does not deal with that at all. So that's almost like a side benefit. The more you release, the more you do sort of these types of techniques, the more you get that side benefit. But really what we're interested in from a releasing standpoint is not so much making the expressing of intent flow smoother, but rather actually making the manifestation happen more reliably and faster. And releasing is absolutely key to that. Well, there's a couple of types of releasing. The first is passive and the second is active. And you might be looking at the slide thinking, wait a minute, there's 3 bullet points. Well, normative is really my word for passive forms of releasing. And some people even question, is passive releasing even possible? Well, let me ask you a question. Right now, are you thinking about how much you earn at work? Are you thinking about the fact that if you're sitting down, you're not falling through the chair, that the chair is actually supporting you? There's an endless number of examples that I can give you like this. We're in fact released on what we believe about reality all the time. And you can see maybe why I call this normative. It's because it's really part of our normal everyday thought processes. I mean, you don't expect the chair to not hold you, so of course you don't think at all about it when you sit down on the chair. It's going to hold you. It's a normal part of your reality. Well, there are actually ways to use power of thought that become normative. And this is what some of the techniques that you've seen that have you, for example, put up a board that has a bunch of pictures on it that you've cut out of magazines that are things that you want. So if you're trying to lose weight, maybe you cut out a bunch of thin people, for instance, and you put them on this board where you can always look at it. What they're trying to do there is sort of accomplish this idea of normative release. They're trying to get you to the point where that's just considered normal in your psyche. Another very good example of it is often seen in business literature, where to become successful, you're encouraged to go hang around other successful people to sort of absorb their aura. That's another example of this normative releasing. The idea is the more time you spend around them, the more their reality becomes normal to you. Now, that type of passive or normative releasing is very different than active releasing. And most of this session, in fact, all of the session from here on out, is really going to deal with active releasing. The reason for that is very simple. Passive releasing is much more difficult to make work than active releasing is. So I want to give you, your best chance for success. And really that's going to come from active forms of releasing.